Hello, especially for the Dirty Secrets channel.
The vows. Sarah Matthews stood at the altar of St. Augustine's Church, a vision in white at just 20 years old. Her hands trembled slightly as they held a small bouquet of lilies. Across from her stood Father Thomas Barrett, no longer to be called father after today. His salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his eyes crinkling with a smile that made her heart flutter despite their 27-year age gap. The whispers had followed them for months. Too young. Too naive. He's old enough to be her father. But Sarah had never known her real father. And, in Thomas, she found the stability and wisdom she'd always craved. When he renounced his priesthood to marry her, she felt chosen in a way she never had before. "You may now kiss the bride," Bishop Wilson announced, his voice echoing through the cathedral that Thomas had served faithfully for 2 decades. As Thomas leaned in to seal their union, Sarah caught sight of her mother, Eleanor, dabbing tears from the corner of her eyes in the front pew. Eleanor had been surprisingly supportive of their union, despite initial reservations. "At least he's a man of God," she had said. Now. That night, as Sarah lay beside her new husband in their modest home adjacent to the church grounds, she traced the lines around his eyes and thanked God for bringing such a righteous man into her life. I'll make you proud," she whispered. I'll be a good wife." Thomas kissed her forehead. "You already make me proud. But remember, marriage is sacred. It requires sacrifice." She nodded, not fully understanding the weight those words would carry in the months to come. Early days. Their first months of marriage passed in a haze of domestic bliss. Thomas continued his work with the church community, though no longer as an active priest, while Sarah made their small cottage into a home. She learned to cook his favorite meals and arrange fresh flowers on Sundays. She attended community functions on his arm, enduring the scrutinizing glances of parishioners who had known Thomas for decades. "They'll adjust," Thomas assured her after a particularly uncomfortable church picnic where several older women had pointedly ignored her. "They just need time," Sarah nodded, though doubt nagged at her. She felt like an imposter in his world. Too young, too inexperienced to be the wife of such a respected man. Eleanor visited often, bringing casseroles and advice. "A man like Thomas needs stability," she'd say, rearranging items in Sarah's kitchen. "He's used to order, structure." Sarah tried not to resent her mother's intrusions. After all, Eleanor had raised her alone after her father abandoned them, working double shifts as a nurse to provide for them. If anyone understood sacrifice and duty, it was Eleanor. "Your mother means well," Thomas said one night after Eleanor had left. "She just wants our marriage to succeed." "I know," Sarah replied, nestling against his chest. "I'm trying." Thomas stroked her hair. "You're doing wonderfully. You're everything I could have hoped for." When Sarah discovered she was pregnant just 4 months into their marriage, she thought it was God's blessing on their union. Proof that they were meant to be, despite the whispers and stares. The announcement. "I'm pregnant," Sarah announced one Sunday afternoon as Eleanor and Thomas sat in their living room after church. Thomas's teacup froze halfway to his lips. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" Thomas asked, his voice strangely tight. Sarah nodded, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I took 3 tests." Eleanor recovered first, crossing the room to embrace her daughter. "Oh, darling! A baby! What wonderful news!" Thomas set down his cup with a careful precision that Sarah had come to recognize as his way of processing shock. Then he smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "God has blessed us," he said finally, coming to kiss her cheek. Later, after Eleanor had left, Sarah found Thomas in his study, Bible open on his desk. "You don't seem happy," she ventured. He looked up, his expression softening. "I'm just surprised. At my age, well, I hadn't expected to become a father." "You'll be wonderful," Sarah assured him, perching on his lap like she sometimes did when seeking his affection. "The baby will adore you." "And what of your dreams?" Thomas asked, tracing the curve of her cheek. "You spoke of college, of traveling." Sarah shrugged. "This is my dream now. You. Our family." Thomas's eyes clouded, but he nodded. "Then we shall make it a beautiful reality." That night, she woke to find his side of the bed empty. Through the crack in the study door, she saw him kneeling in prayer, his whispers too low to decipher. She returned to bed, telling herself this was normal. A man of faith, processing the magnitude of impending fatherhood. Changes. As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, subtle shifts appeared in the fabric of their marriage. Thomas worked later, spent more time in community meetings, and though he dutifully accompanied her to doctor's appointments, he seemed distant, his mind elsewhere. Eleanor, meanwhile, became an increasingly constant presence. She brought prenatal vitamins, sewed baby clothes, and prepared freezer meals for after the birth. Sarah was grateful, especially as fatigue set in, but sometimes felt suffocated by her mother's persistent advice. Thomas likes things just so, Eleanor would remind her, straightening cushions or rearranging Sarah's kitchen. A man his age values order. I know my own husband, Mom, Sarah sometimes snapped, before immediately apologizing. She blamed her irritability on hormones, but beneath that lay a growing discomfort she couldn't name. One evening, Sarah came home from a prenatal class she'd attended alone. Thomas had a church board meeting, to find her mother and husband laughing in the kitchen. They fell silent when she entered, exchanging a glance she couldn't interpret. "What's so funny?" she asked, setting down her purse. "Just reminiscing about the church's Christmas pageant fiasco last year," Thomas explained smoothly. "How was your class, dear?" "Fine," Sarah said, noticing how Eleanor's hand lingered on Thomas's shoulder a moment too long. "We learned about breathing techniques." That night, Thomas was particularly attentive, bringing her tea and massaging her swollen feet. But when he kissed her goodnight, his lips felt cold, his embrace perfunctory. Sarah lay awake, listening to his even breathing beside her, wondering why she felt so alone despite having everything she thought she wanted. Suspicions. By her 6th month of pregnancy, Sarah could no longer ignore the changing dynamics in her home. Thomas and Eleanor had developed a shorthand way of communicating, shared glances, inside jokes, casual touches that lingered. They discussed books and theology at a level that left Sarah feeling childish and inadequate. "Perhaps you should rest, darling," Thomas would suggest whenever these conversations extended past her interest or knowledge. "Eleanor and I can clean up." And Sarah would retreat to the bedroom, listening to their muffled voices and occasional laughter from the kitchen. One afternoon, Sarah returned early from a doctor's appointment that had concluded sooner than expected. She entered quietly, hearing voices from the study. The door was ajar, and through the crack, she saw Thomas holding Eleanor's hands, their foreheads nearly touching. "We can't keep doing this," her mother was saying, voice thick with emotion. "I know," Thomas replied. "But what choice do we have now?" Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She backed away, unwilling to hear more, unwilling to confirm what her instincts were screaming. She slipped out and drove aimlessly for hours, returning only when she'd composed herself enough to feign normalcy. That night, she studied Thomas as he read in bed beside her, searching his familiar face for signs of the stranger he was becoming. When he reached for her, his touch gentle on her growing belly, she wanted desperately to ask him directly, "Are you having an affair with my mother?" But fear stopped her. Fear of the answer. Fear of what it would mean for her child. Fear of losing the only real family she'd ever known. Instead, she said, "I missed you today." Thomas kissed her forehead. "I'm right here, Sarah. I'll always be here." The lie hung between them, invisible but palpable. The letter. In her 7th month, Sarah found the letter. She hadn't been snooping, not really. She'd been looking for a postage stamp in Thomas's desk drawer, when her fingers brushed against an envelope addressed to him in her mother's handwriting. Something, intuition, perhaps, made her open it. "My dearest Thomas, asterisk. What we've done is unforgivable. I look at my daughter and see her trust, her innocence, and I am ashamed. Yet when I'm with you, I forget everything but the feel of your hands, the wisdom in your eyes that she's too young to truly appreciate. This child she carries complicates everything. I suggested she consider other options early on, but she was so certain, so happy. Now I find myself in the impossible position of betraying my own daughter for my happiness, or denying what I've come to believe is a love ordained by God himself. When you left the priesthood for her, I was devastated. Not just for her youth, but for my own selfish reasons. I had loved you from afar for so long, through all those Sunday confessions, through the grief counseling after Robert left us. You were forbidden then, but when you stepped down from the cloth, something inside me broke. I know what the Bible says about coveting, about adultery, about honor, yet here we are. We must make a decision, Thomas. Before the baby comes, before Sarah realizes asterisk, the letter ended there. As if Eleanor had been interrupted or lost courage, Sarah sat on the floor of Thomas's study, letter trembling in her hands, as the pieces fell into horrifying place. The late-night phone calls Thomas took in his study, the way Eleanor always knew his schedule. How they both encouraged her to rest, to nap, to go to bed early. Her husband and her mother, the two people she trusted most in the world. She was still sitting there, numb with shock, when Thomas found her an hour later. Confrontation. "How long?" Sarah asked, voice hollow as she held up the letter. Thomas's face drained of color. He closed the study door gently before kneeling beside her. "Sarah, how long?" Each word felt like glass in her throat. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. 6 months. The timeline hit her like a physical blow. 6 months. Before the pregnancy. Almost from the beginning of their marriage. "Did you ever love me?" she whispered. "Or was I just convenient? Young? Impressionable?" "I care for you deeply," Thomas said, choosing his words with priestly precision. I thought I was doing the right thing, marrying you, giving you stability, while sleeping with my mother?" Her voice rose despite her effort to remain calm. "While letting me believe our child would be born into a loving home?" "The child will have that," Thomas said quickly. "We would never abandon." "We?" Sarah stood, one hand bracing her swollen belly. "There is no we in this, Thomas." Not anymore." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Sarah knew without checking who it would be. "Don't answer it," she pleaded, suddenly afraid of what she might do if faced with her mother's betrayal on top of Thomas's. But Thomas, ever the dutiful host, moved past her toward the door. "We need to discuss this rationally, all three of us." "Rationally?" Sarah laughed, a jagged sound. "There's nothing rational about any of this." The door opened, and Eleanor's voice floated down the hallway. "I brought that book we discussed, Thomas. The one about—" She stopped abruptly upon seeing Sarah's tear-streaked face and the letter clutched in her hand. "Oh, God," Eleanor whispered. "Sarah, baby, I can explain." "Don't call me that," Sarah said, a cold fury replacing her shock. "Don't you dare call me your baby." Revelations. They sat in the living room, a grotesque parody of family togetherness. Sarah on the armchair, Thomas and Eleanor side by side on the sofa, no longer pretending distance. "It wasn't planned," Eleanor began, her hands twisting in her lap. "After your wedding, I was helping Thomas adapt to married life, giving advice." "Giving a lot more than advice," Sarah interrupted bitterly. Thomas cleared his throat. "Sarah, your pregnancy was unexpected. We had already realized our feelings by then." "So this child is just an inconvenience to your grand love affair?" Sarah cradled her belly protectively. "Were you hoping I'd lose it? Is that why you kept suggesting I might consider my options?" Eleanor paled. "No! Never! That's your child, Sarah! My grandchild! And what was your plan? Keep deceiving me while carrying on behind my back? Or were you going to suggest some modern arrangement where we all live together, one big happy family?" Thomas and Eleanor exchanged a glance that told Sarah everything. "You actually considered that," she said, incredulous. "You thought I might agree to share my husband with my own mother." "We prayed for guidance," Thomas said softly. "We know this is wrong, Sarah. We've sinned terribly against you." "Don't bring God into this," Sarah snapped. "You gave up the right to spiritual authority when you broke your vows, both to the church and to me." Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand. "Sarah, please. You're still so young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Thomas and we're in our 40s. This might be our only chance at what? Happiness?" At the expense of mine? Sarah withdrew her hand as if burned. You raised me alone after Dad left. You always told me how it destroyed you, his betrayal, and now you've done the same to me. The silence that followed was deafening. There's something else you should know, Thomas finally said, his voice heavy. Something that might help you understand, though it doesn't excuse our actions. Eleanor shook her head frantically. Thomas, no! But he continued, eyes fixed on Sarah's. Eleanor and I knew each other long before you were born. We were involved when we were young. Before I entered the seminary, before she met your father. Sarah felt the room tilt. What are you saying? Robert wasn't your biological father, Sarah, Eleanor whispered. Thomas is the truth. Sarah stared at them, her mind refusing to process the words hanging in the air. That's impossible, she finally managed. You would have told me. You wouldn't have let me marry my... She couldn't finish the sentence, nausea rising in her throat. The marriage was never consummated in the church's eyes, Thomas said quickly, his theological training surfacing even now. I requested special dispensation when I left the priesthood, without specifying the full reason. Technically? Sarah's laugh was borderline hysterical. You're talking about technicalities? You married your own daughter. Eleanor was crying openly now. I never told him about you. After he entered the seminary, I discovered I was pregnant. I met Robert shortly after and let him believe you were his. When he left us, I was too ashamed to tell Thomas the truth. When did you know? Sarah demanded of Thomas. When did you realize who I was? Thomas looked down. I suspected when you started attending services regularly 3 years ago. You have my mother's eyes, my grandfather's chin. But I wasn't certain until when? Until Eleanor confirmed it, 6 months ago. The timeline clicked into place with sickening clarity. Right after their wedding, right when the affair began. So you found out I was your daughter, and your response was to start sleeping with my mother instead of me? Sarah stood shakily, one hand on her belly, the other braced against the wall. And neither of you thought to tell me the truth? To annul this farce of a marriage immediately? We were going to tell you after the baby came, Eleanor insisted. We thought the shock might harm the pregnancy. How considerate, Sarah spat. And I suppose you two plan to raise my child together? Play happy grandparents while hiding that their mother married her own father? Thomas stood, reaching for her. Sarah, please. Let's discuss this calmly. For the baby's sake. Don't touch me. Sarah backed away, her mind racing through options, none of them good. I'm leaving. Now. Don't try to stop me. Don't try to follow me. Where will you go? Eleanor cried. You're 7 months pregnant. Sarah grabbed her purse and car keys. Anywhere but here. As she walked out the door of what she'd thought was her home, she heard Thomas call after her, his voice breaking. Sarah, I'm sorry. We never meant to hurt you. She didn't look back. Aftermath. Sarah spent the night in a motel on the edge of town, oscillating between numb shock and waves of visceral horror. Every memory of her marriage now tainted with knowledge too terrible to fully comprehend. Every childhood moment with her mother now suspect. Had Eleanor always seen Thomas in her face? Had she resented Sarah for it? By morning, Sarah had made a decision. She checked out of the motel and drove to the home of Dr. Helen Chen, her obstetrician. Dr. Chen listened without judgment as Sarah explained that she needed to leave town immediately, that her marriage had collapsed under circumstances she couldn't discuss, that she had nowhere to go but couldn't stay. I have a sister in Seattle, Dr. Chen said finally. She runs a women's shelter with transitional housing for mothers. She can help you until you get on your feet. 2 days later, Sarah boarded a bus to Seattle with nothing but a suitcase and the business card for New Beginnings Women's Center. She didn't tell Thomas or Eleanor where she was going. She changed her phone number and deleted her social media accounts. In Seattle, Sarah found unexpected peace in the community of women at New Beginnings. Most were escaping abusive relationships or extreme poverty. None questioned her vague explanation of a complicated divorce, and the shelter's strict confidentiality policies meant she could start fresh without fear of being found. When her son was born 6 weeks later, early but healthy, Sarah named him David, after the biblical king who rose from obscurity to greatness despite impossible odds. As she held her son, studying his tiny features for any resemblance to Thomas, Sarah made a promise. "Your story begins with me, David. Everything before is just prologue." "Dr. Chen, I've been searching for years." Eleanor's gaze moved to David. "Is this?" "My son," Sarah said firmly. "David, go to your room for a minute, please." Once David was out of earshot, Sarah crossed her arms. "Why are you here?" "Thomas died," Eleanor said simply, 3 months ago. Heart attack." Sarah felt a complicated surge of emotions: relief, grief, anger, confusion. She had spent years in therapy working through the trauma of her marriage, the shocking truth of her parentage, the complex feelings toward the man who had been both husband and father. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said formally. Eleanor shook her head. "I didn't come for sympathy. I came to give you this." She held out a thick envelope. "His will. He left everything to you and the child. And his confession."
"Confession?" "He wrote it all down before he died. Everything. How we met when we were young.
How he left me to enter the seminary when I told him I was pregnant with someone else's child. A lie I told because I knew he was committed to the priesthood. How he never knew you were his until after your wedding, when I finally told him the truth in a moment of jealous weakness."
Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands.
"And you? Why are you really here?"
Eleanor's shoulders sagged.
"To say I'm sorry, to beg forgiveness I don't deserve, to see my grandson, if you'll allow it, even just once." She looked at Sarah with ancient sadness. "And to tell you I'm dying. Cancer. 6 months. Maybe less." Sarah felt the weight of history, of generational pain and secrets, pressing down on her. 5 years ago, she might have sent Eleanor away with bitter words. Now, with a hard-earned degree and years of counseling, she saw something else, a chance to break the cycle.
"David," she called softly, "come meet your grandmother."
Yes. As David cautiously approached, Sarah made no promises, offered no false absolution, but in allowing this meeting, she gave something more valuable: the possibility of healing, not just for Eleanor or for David, but for herself. Some betrayals could never be undone. Some wounds would always leave scars. But standing in her graduation robe, her son's hand in hers, Sarah finally understood. Redemption wasn't about forgetting the past, but about refusing to let it determine the future. "Hello, David," Eleanor said, kneeling despite evident pain to meet her grandson's eyes. "I've waited a very long time to meet you." "Are you my daddy's mommy?" David asked innocently. Eleanor looked up at Sarah, a question in her eyes. Sarah nodded slightly. "Yes, David, she is." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was a beginning. Redemption. 5 years later, Sarah adjusted her graduation cap in the mirror of her small apartment, David's reflection visible behind her as he carefully arranged his dinosaur toys in a circle. "Do I look okay, buddy?" she asked. David looked up, his solemn 5-year-old face breaking into a grin. "You look pretty, Mommy. Like a superhero." Sarah smiled. Her social work degree had been hard-won: night classes, study sessions during David's naps, internships that barely covered childcare costs. But today marked the official beginning of her new life, her real life. A knock at the door made her freeze momentarily before she remembered. Helen was picking them up for the ceremony.
David raced to open it, then stopped short.
"Mommy?" He returned. "There's a lady here." Sarah turned, expecting Helen, only to find her mother standing in the doorway, 5 years older, hair now fully gray, eyes wet with tears. "Sarah," Eleanor whispered, "I found you." Sarah instinctively moved between Eleanor and David. "How?"
Thank you for watching. If you liked the story, like, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Thank you.